Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me. This is the morning market review. It is Thursday, it's the 29th of June. My name is Russell Shaw. I'm a senior market specialist at FXCM. My email address is rshaw@fxcm.com, and of course, if you'd like to correspond with me, that's the email address to use. Just going to go ahead and bring up our disclaimers. We'll start off with the high risk investment warning. I'll keep this on screen for a few moments. And here's our market commentaries disclaimer. All right, and our references market scope and trading view. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at trading view. What I want to show you guys is the US 2-year yield. I want to put in the US dollar with this. So let's just click the plus button here, US dollar, and we'll put that on a new pane. So the US dollar is underneath. Now, what's interesting about this is the two instruments have lost their correlation. So I'm going to just put in the correlation coefficient. When I say lost their correlation, just to some degree, it was stronger before. So let's go ahead, bring in the correlation coefficient. And make sure that it is being measured against the US dollar. Okay, and let's bring that in. All right, now you can see prior to this area here, so let's go to the beginning of this year, we had a fairly strong correlation. It was about 80%. It's now dropped to 60%. So there is a positive correlation. It's just not as strong or as robust as it was previously. And the reason I want to bring this up is, well, if the correlation is going to reassert, okay, if we're going to move back towards 80, two things have to happen. One of two things have to happen here. Either the dollar has to move up and catch up with the 2-year yield, or the 2-year yield has to come down and catch up with the greenback. And what effectively is happening with the greenback or the US dollar is interesting indeed. I'm going to just bring market scope across. Yesterday, we had an ambiguous market situation where dollar was moving up, and it looked as if the euro and pound may be moving up as well. Very strange for that all to happen together. They should move in opposite directions. It looks as if the dollar won out yesterday. The dollar effectively completed its reference candle. Let's just understand what the reference candle is here. Reference candle is at least 3 candles, and let me just fix this up. This moves over there, and the 3 candle pattern looks something like this, where the middle candle is the candle with the lowest low. We call that the reference candle. That's this guy. That's this guy here. Okay, that's the lowest low in at least 3 candles. And then the candle to the right needs to move above the reference candle's high. It's done that. That's condition 2. Condition 3, it has to close above the reference candle's high. It's done that. What's the big deal about reference candles? Well, swings begin with reference candles all the time. Okay, the difficulty, if it was as easy as that, we would be, you know, much happier traders, so to speak. But the idea is reference candles don't necessarily lead to swings, but all swings start with reference candles. So we've got the reference candle. The question now is, do we get the swing in the US dollar? Because that's got all sorts of repercussions with it. Okay, if the dollar starts swinging, what does that mean for general markets? Well, let's just go back to trading view. If the dollar starts swinging, it seems that the correlation coefficient is going to strengthen. We start heading towards the 2-year yield. And then, of course, the question is, well, why is the 2-year yield so strong? And the reason it's so strong is because there's still a major fight by central banks against inflation. Yesterday, there was a panel discussion at Sintra in Portugal, and on the panel was the Fed Chair Powell, Bank of Japan Governor Ueda. We had the Bank of England Governor Bailey, and the European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde, and they were all part of this panel, and they were all saying that there was a way to go to rein in inflation. And I think that's what is being reflected in the US 2-year yield, and it potentially is the driver of the US dollar at the moment. So effectively, we have now seen the US dollar pop into zone 1. And the question is, do we get that swing? And the reason it's important to answer that question is because the US dollar is by and large regarded as a safe haven. It's regarded as an instrument of safety. So we've got to ask the question, if there is movement towards safety, what's happening to the risk side of the market? And the likely answer is that the risk side of the market is probably taking a bit of strain. Okay, so that's the theme we're trying to explore this morning. If we're getting a lift off in the dollar, are the stock markets starting to take some strain? Okay, so let's do a top-down analysis with the US dollar. I'm going to come back to this moving average. I think it's something that we need to watch. But let's just start off with the symmetrical triangle. Again, I would much prefer the dollar to be trending than range bound. It's range bound, but we're getting what looks like a reference candle on the weekly as well. Okay, a reference candle on the weekly is a strong signal. And again, if we do get this, we'll only know at the end of the week, because this is the weekly chart. We'll only know at the close of trade on Friday. Well, if we get the reference candle here, the obvious question is, do we get that swing? Okay, do we get that swing? So we want to keep an eye on that. Take a look at the RSI. RSI is starting to pop above 50. It has oscillated around 50. What I'm looking for now is to see if this reference candle on the weekly turns out to be meaningful. And if it is meaningful, then I'm looking to see if the RSI moves and maintains on the positive side of 50, because that's going to be a different situation altogether. So there is a movement happening on the dollar. There is movement on the daily. Let's go down to the hourly. And what you need to keep an eye out for on the hourly is if we get the positive crossover on the stochastic. If we get the positive crossover on the stochastic, we've already got a bullish setup in terms of the EMAs. The EMAs, exponential moving averages, are what we call trend following indicators. They keep track of trend. The stochastic is momentum based, and when it is in sync with one another, well, does the momentum go into its upper quintile and hold? And if it does, then there is something happening with the dollar. Another possibility here, okay, another possibility here is the pullback towards a support area. In this case, the central pivot will be the first logical place to look, and then of course to see if it pops up. So we want to keep an eye on the stochastic. Stochastic's actually starting to pop. Can you see it's starting to move above? And we want to see if the stochastic makes its way to the upper quintile. Again, dollar being, I want to emphasize this, safe haven. If it's a safe haven, let's take a look at some of the risk markets. We're going to start off with NASDAQ. Okay, start off with the NASDAQ. All right, I beg your pardon. It's just, there we go. It was just taking its time. Okay, there we go. All right, now with the NASDAQ, we are overbought. We've been looking at this overbought condition for quite some time. To me, the overbought condition must normalize. It can't stay overbought for an extended period. If it does, that's a bubble. Okay, so we need to see it normalize. Let's go down to the daily chart. So what's happened with the NASDAQ? It slipped from zone 1 and it's moved into zone 2. It's on the border here. That's interesting. But the slip from zone 1 into zone 2 is a relative movement of weakness. And I just wonder if it's going to maintain in zone 2 and perhaps even threaten zone 3. How will we test that? What I would do is I'll take a look at the US dollar, and if the US dollar is starting to move up, then I would expect the NASDAQ to show some pressure to the downside. So we could see dollar moving up, go back down to NASDAQ, and we want to see if the risk markets, the stock markets, are being put under pressure. Now, what's interesting about NASDAQ is there was a story that has emerged yesterday around chip stocks, AMD, NVIDIA, Micron, in that the Biden administration is looking to tighten export controls of chips to China, specifically chips that are used in artificial intelligence. Okay, what happened is there was a ban put on chip exports last October. That prompted NVIDIA to manufacture a chip that was slightly less powerful than what it was producing, and that was used to circumvent export controls. The new controls are effectively going to ban that watered down chip as well. So it's aimed at curbing China's development of artificial intelligence. NVIDIA is a big part of the tech sector, and that may put some pressure on NASDAQ just at a time when we are seeing an overbought condition that needs to correct. Now, once this starts correcting, because it's still in uptrend, I think that we still look at potential dips as opportunities to exploit. So we'll keep an eye out for that, but let's just understand the causality or the causation. Dollar, safe haven. If it moves up, take a look at the risk markets. Are the risk markets under pressure? Are they moving down? Let's take a look at S&P 500. All right. You can see that the S&P 500 did touch this overbought condition here briefly. It has normalized. It has got a series of higher troughs followed by higher peaks. Let's just go down to the daily chart. And the S&P has also slipped from zone 1. Zone 1 is the bullish area. It's pushed down into the neutral area. That's a relative movement downwards. It's a relative weakness seeping in. Okay. What would be interesting actually to take a look at in terms of S&P and Nasdaq is, well, what happens if this is what we're seeing? Let's put in some peaks and troughs. What happens if we're getting a peak over here? We're getting a trough over here. Is this a lower peak? So we can put in LP question mark. If it's a lower peak, there's the weakness starting to seep in. Go back to Nasdaq. Okay, same thing. Let's put in our peaks and troughs. Put in our peak over here. Put in our trough over here. And then the question is, are we getting this to be a lower peak? If it is, that's the weakness starting to seep in. Okay, so you can see that the movement down into zone 2, well, that's interesting. Let's go to DAX, just the final chart of this morning. Let's go through to DAX, see what's happening on the European side in terms of the risk markets. All right, so the DAX predominantly been moving sideways over the last 10 weeks or so. Really has lost some of its shape in terms of the uptrend. If we go down to the daily chart, it slipped all the way from zone 1 into zone 2, slipped into zone 3. It's now challenging, it's trying to come up. Let's put our peaks and troughs in. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's put in our peak over here. Let's put in our trough over here. And even though there has been a movement from zone 3 to zone 2, I'm going to pose a question. Well, what happens if we're getting the LP here? Okay, and if we're getting the lower peak in DAX, if we're getting the lower peak in S&P, if we're getting the lower peak in Nasdaq, okay, well, those are all signs of weakness. And if those signs of weakness are starting to manifest, what's on the other side of that? And we go back to the US dollar. Okay, and the US dollar here, well, let's put in the peak and trough for the US dollar. So we can put in T, P. Now watch this. This actually here, we spoke about this as being the reference candle, HT. So we've got the higher peak here, it's completed. Okay, so we want to see this tension that's working between the risk on, risk off instruments. Let's see how that manifests over the next few days. If there's any questions, please go ahead and type those through. Any questions, please go ahead and type those through. All right, nothing coming through. So let's wrap up here, guys. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Always a pleasure, much appreciated. Want to wish everyone a good day, a good evening ahead. We shall speak tomorrow morning. Thanks very much, guys.